Good day, everyone. I am Daphne Esalo. On my part, I will be discussing the Moro people and the diaspora of the Moros. Without further ado, let me begin.
The Moros and the post-independent period. So when Philippines gained its independence from the American on July 4, 1946, the young Philippine Republic continued the American policy, especially in Moroland, in which it threatened their cultural and identity survival. And also, the government exploited the Moros, which caused resentment and discontentment that fueled the Moro rebellion that led to Camlon uprising in the 50s. So the Kamlon uprising in 50s, it was not an act of brigandage. It was a moral rebellion and a holy war against what was perceived as a foreign system. For the Moro, Kamlon was a hero rather than a criminal or a brigand, which the government perceived. The attempt of the government to integration of the Moros and the Christian, they enacted the Commission on National Integration. However, the commission didn't lead into something substantial, for it failed to address the underlying issues of the Moros, so it died eventually. And now we're down to diaspora of the Moros. So the, the first one is the massacre in the Rock. So Sabah, this part, the red part, Sabah is a region in northern Borneo that is currently part of Malaysia, but during in the 1960s, it was a subject to territorial dispute between Philippines and Malaysia. President Macapagal initiated the claim to Sabah in 1962, but he pursued it through peaceful and diplomatic channels, while President Marcos resorted to extra-legal action to secure the claim, and this, coupled with his obsession to stay in power beyond his legal mandate, led to the lead to Jabida massacre in the 1968, where 64 Moro trainees were killed. The massacre was allegedly part of a wider clandestine. Clandestine is a secret operation carried out by a government agency, military, without the knowledge of the public. So the operation is called Operation Merdeka. In the massacre, Jibin Arola was the only survivor of the massacre. He survived through swimming the shark-infested water of Corregidor to Cavite. He said that they were ordered shot because they refused to follow orders to attack Sabah. For him, they couldn't attack the Sabah because they perceived them as their brothers. Yeah. So if the project Merdeka was succeed or if the project Merdeka succeeded and Sabah was invaded, the consequence would have been disastrous. Whatever it is, Sabah today is now in a progressive and a better circumstances. Down to founding of the MIM. So MIM, or the Mindanao Independence Movement, was formed because Muslim political leaders felt that the government was not doing enough for the Muslims. So on May 1, 1968, Dato Udtog Matalam Cotabato governor organized the Muslim and later Mindanao Independence movement, which sought to form a state comprising the southern portion of the Philippine archipelago. So, in the manifesto issued by the MIM, the following among the matters were considered. So, in simpler terms, the manifesto emphasized the right to self-determination is recognized for minority groups under the UN Charter and Declaration of Human Rights. The Islamic World Congress supports the right of Muslim in non-Muslim states to self-determination. The government's actions, such as the Corregidor fiasco and isolating Muslim communities, have harmed Muslims. Islam as a communal religion and a way of life requires a specific territory for practicing its principles and laws. MIM didn't last long, but it contributed in no small way to the revival of the spirit of independence among the Moros, particularly the studentry and the professionals, especially in the creation of the MNFL. Then the rat strikes. So Ilaga The emergence of Ilaga was allegedly attributed to threats posed by the MIM to the Christians in Cotabato. July 1972, the Associated Press, an American war service, reported that Ilaga organization was the brainchild of the 7 Christian leaders of Cotabato. Basically, Ilagas are Christians. They're Christians. So the leaders of this organization are called Magnificent Seven. So, on March 22, 1970, Commander Toothpick, one of the leader of the Ilaga, Han. So, Commander Toothpick and his gang, the Fanatics, initiated as their baptism of fire an attack on an isolated Moro village, killing 6 people and burning several houses. They left behind their horrifying trademarks on the victims, such as cut ears, slashed nipples, blacked out eyes, and cross marking on the body. Ilaga are lawless, armed, protected by the government official and military in remote corners of Mindanao to look for and kill Muslim rebels, whoever they believe to be their sympathizer.
During the Marcos regime, the mistreatment of Muslims reached its peak when authorities sanctioned and supported the Ilagas. The Ilagas carried out violent attacks on Muslims, which results into numerous massacres and deaths. So these are the list of the massacre made by the Ilagas. Indeed, it was a rat strikes. Now I'm passing the floor to the next reporter.
The displacement and dispossession of the Lumad and the Moro peoples in their own ancestral lands. What is the Regalian doctrine and what is the fundamental contradiction between the Regalian doctrine and ancestral domain? Regalian doctrine states that the state declares itself the sole owner of what is called state domain and reserves the right to classify it for purposes of proper disposition to its citizens. Thus, lands classified as alienable and disposable may be owned privately and titled to themselves by individuals or corporations, and lands, forest areas, bodies of water, and so on are described as inalienable and non-disposable, are state-owned and are not private ownership. The Republic of the Philippines inherited the Regalian doctrine from Spain and also adopted hook, line, and sinker, all laws affecting land and other natural resources enacted and implemented by the American colonizers. This constitutes one of the biggest chunks of the institutions carried over from colonial times. It is said that Spain's discovery of the Philippine archipelago gave the Spain crown, as was the practice among European expansionists in the 15th and 16th centuries, possessory rights over the island. Since the king stood for the Spanish state, it was understood that his dominion was also state dominion, and the king or the state reserves the right and authority to dispose of lands therein to its subjects and in accordance with its laws. The Regalian doctrine is regarded as a legal fiction because no such law ever existed. In any case, it was on the basis of this authority that the Spanish crown handed down a law in 1894 commanding its subjects in the Philippine colony to register their lands. It was presumably on the basis of this authority that Spain ceded the entire Philippine archipelago to the United States through the Treaty of Paris of 10 December 1898. Whether the cession was legitimate or not, it was entirely a matter of opinion. To leave no doubt about it, the Americans employed armed states governments, the Treaty of Paris, and the subsequent Treaty of 7 November 1900s, which added proportions of Philippine territory overlooked earlier, effected a transfer of title ownership or of sovereign rights over the entirety of the Philippine archipelago. To ensure a challenge exercise of the state's authority to dispose of domain or public lands, the Philippine Commission enacted a law 6 months after the passage of the Land Registration Act, which took away from indigenous leaders that was or chief their authority to dispose of lands within their respective jurisdictions. The Land Registration Act No. 496, passed by the Philippine Commission on 6 November 1902, was adopted in the Philippines. It institutionalized the torrent system in the country, first introduced in South Australia as a Real Property Act of 1857 to 1858. Point 188. This law mandated and provided for the guidelines for the registration and type ruling of privately owned lands, whether by individual persons or by corporations. The strength of the torrent system is further reinforced by the provisions of the Public Land Law, which happen to be patently discriminatory against the indigenous communities. The same accentuate the contradiction between Regalian doctrine and ancestral domain concepts. Mindanao Sulu crisis. The state affairs in Moroland had become very bad by the late 1960s, and by the early 1970s had reached crisis proportions. There are three events in particular helped to precipitate the crisis in Mindanao and Sulu. One of these is the Corregidor accident. 28 Muslims recruits called Jabida Commandos undergoing welfare training in Corregidor Island, allegedly in secret preparation for Philippine military operations in Sabah, codenamed Operation Merdeka, were treacherously and summarily executed late in March 1968 by Philippine Army personnel. They were executed for a month or says another version over the prospect of being sent to action against brother Muslims in Malaysia. According to the latter version, the Muslim recruits at first had been told never training fight communists, but were annoyed when they learned the truth. One trainee escaped to tell the tale, which became at once a cause of celebration in Philippine politics and led to rapid deterioration of the Philippine-Malaysian relations. Those relations have been badly stained anyway since 1962, and former President Macapagal had formally put forth the Philippine claim to Sabah based on tenuous sovereignty over exercised by the Sultanate of Sulu over the northern Borneo territory. Many Moros were appalled at the inhuman treatment of the Morochinis, and for the Moros, the Corregidor accident was the Jabida massacre. One group in Cotabato City, province rather, headed by former Governor Dato Udtog Matalam, declared in May 1 of that year the formation of Muslim, later Mindanao Independence Movement or MIM, the establishment of an Islamic Republic of the Mindanao and Sulu. The early 1970s, however, Muslim-Christian relations had been sent to the point where Christians no longer had any gain of political cooperation with Muslims, as the two populations became radically polarized, especially as the November 8, 1971 elections drew near. In Cotabato, the MIM had aroused Christian fears of a Moro uprising. There were reports of Muslim youths undergoing months of rigid training in the Middle East and Malaysia, and then the secret came to Cotabato itself. Some Christians evacuated to safer places, others were determined to stay and fight for the productive farms and businesses their hard work had established. Conditions were right to the explosion, which finally came forward in the middle of 1970 in Upi, North Cotabato. A Christian Ilonggo settler, Feliciano Luces, alias Toothpick, led an event of terrorists later on called Ilagas or Rats in attacks against Moros at those hands. They had allegedly suffered terrorism and exploitation. For years, the latter were quickly dubbed the Black Shirts because of their uniforms and were said to be the military arm of the MIM. By the end of 1970, the fight between Ilagas and Black Shirts in Cotabato resulted in the closing of many schools, disruptions of the economy, and mass evacuation of thousands of innocent victims. The Social Welfare Administration estimated that some 30,000 Muslims and Christians and terrorists had been forced to abandon their homes and farms. Jabin Arda, the only survivor of the Jabida mass, survived by swimming the shark-infested waters of Corregidor to Cavite, was in its way a miracle. When the invasion training hit the international news headlines, Malaysians expectedly are sharp to the point of going into a frenzy of war preparation. President Marcos vehemently denied the alleged plan of invasion, but no one took his words seriously. Such a project of formidable magnitude and full diplomatic dangers could not have been undertaken without his official go signal. Besides, the man in charge of this top-level project is Major Eduardo Martilino. Major Eduardo Martolino was an Ilocano. Once a Christian, he reportedly became a Muslim and adopted Abdul Latif as his new Muslim name after marrying a moral lass by the name of Safia. Major Eduardo Martolino made to appear as a man behind the ill-fated project. On his shoulders all the blame, insult, curse, and international ramifications for placing squarely. Obviously, he was sacrifice of her themselves, sacrificed to conceal and save the real brains behind the invasion plan.
The Philippine government has always considered the Mindanao conflict to be a purely domestic problem. However, in the 1970s, Muslim politicians and the MNLF succeeded in bringing their grievances to the OIC, which internationalized the conflict by bringing in the international Islamic community as a powerful player. So what is this OIC, and what is its role in the Mindanao peace process? The OIC is an intergovernmental organization of all Islamic states founded in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia in 1971. Its membership includes powerful and wealthy oil exporting countries such as Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain, Iran, Iraq, and Libya. Let's proceed to the general objectives of the OIC. First, to promote Islamic solidarity among member states. To consolidate economic, social, cultural, and other forms of cooperation. To enable mutual consultation. To eliminate social segregation and discrimination and eradicate colonialism in all its forms. To take the measures necessary to support international peace and security founded on justice. To consolidate efforts to safeguard holy places. And to support the people of Palestine and help them to regain their rights and dignity, independence and national rights, and to create a suitable atmosphere. Let's proceed to the connection of the OIC, MNLF, and Islamic faith, but first, we encounter these words fitna and fasad. What are the meaning behind these words? The Quran cites the condition of fitna as justifying the use of force. Fitna may be translated as trial, temptation, or putting a man in difficulties. Fitna is often used in the Holy Quran in conjunction with the term fasad, which means corruption and disruption and signifies social disorder and tyranny. The OIC's support for the MNLF struggle against the Philippine government is rooted in the traditions and teachings of Islam, which justifies killing to prevent fitna and fasad in order to re-establish order and create conditions for the reign of law. As Muhammad states in the Holy Quran, if in a society some people do evil and others do nothing to prevent it, then all of them will be engulfed in ruin because the good have been only passively good and do nothing actively to prevent evil. At this point, let's know more of the OIC support for the MNLF. The OIC provided the MNLF with significant political, material, and moral support for its struggle against the Philippine government. Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Jordan covertly provided armed equipments and funds. Much of this aid are now transported to Malaysia, and from Malaysia, it is then transported to the Mindanao. The MNLF leadership took refuge in the Middle East, with Nur Miswari spending most of his time in exile. The OIC expressed its concern about the Mindanao conflict at the Third Annual Islamic Conference in Jeddah in 1972. In the 1973 conference in Benghazi, the Quadripartite Commission was formed with foreign ministers of Libya, Saudi Arabia, Senegal, and Somalia. At the 5th Annual Islamic Conference, the Philippines' partners in the ASEAN countered the influence of the more radical OIC members such as Libya, Syria, and Iran. In January 1975, the Philippine government finally agreed to talk with the MNLF in Jeddah, but the talks soon broke down. The MNLF demanded an autonomous Bangsamoro state which would exercise all functions of government except for foreign affairs and cover the entire area of Mindanao, Sulu, and Palawan. Tripoli Agreement was signed in 1976 between the Philippine government and the MNLF under the auspices of the OIC. The OIC as a whole was now more prepared to accede to the wishes of Indonesia and Malaysia and to treat the Mindanao conflict as a regional issue. Bangladesh and Indonesia were added to the Quadripartite Commission, which then became a committee of 6.
So, understanding the tri-people community of Mindanao for sustainable peace and development. So, what makes Mindanao stands out from the rest is that it represents diversity. So we all know that Mindanao is composed of the tri people, the Bangsamoro people, the Lumads, and the Christian Filipinos, or also known as the Bisaya, bearing their own culture, history, and distinct characteristics. This recognition and appreciation of the multi-people character of Mindanao is a recent development, and the tri-people concept only emerged in the 80s. So let's talk about the nature and characteristics of ethnic relations in Mindanao. So the reason why the Bangsamoro, the Lumads, and the Christian Filipinos are brought together in Mindanao is because of a strange mix of colonialism and religion. However, the reality in Mindanao is there had not yet been a period of complete healing and eradication of biases and prejudices. So they have their perception of one another, each of which bears misconceptions. So the Bangsamoro people think that the problem of Mindanao was brought by the coming of the settlers, the Bisaya or the Christian Filipinos. Also, the Lumas would also think that the Bangsamoro and the Christian Filipinos are the causes of the present-day Mindanao problems. And also, the Christian Filipinos also have a common misconceptions among the Bangsamoro, and they think that living with the Bangsamoro is inferior and insecurity. And it is kind of sad because until this day, some people will still think this way towards them. Basically, do you know that these prejudices and biases still firmly remain up to this day? And I know some of us have heard about a lot of these prejudices from our neighbors or from acquaintances and etc. However, given the above mentioned nature and characteristics of the relationship among these people in the present, we have to deal with the self-determination of the Bangsamoro and the Lumads and the needs for the country to move forward to attain the status of a newly industrialized country. Thus, part of this creative process is that we must search for the commonalities underneath the layers of inherited and acquired biases and prejudices against one another. We must search for similarities because despite our differences, our similarities still prevail. So first is that we may differ in our religious faith, but we all believe in the same God. Although it is called by different names, by different religions, but people are actually talking about one and the same creator of the universe and of mankind. Second is humanity. When we talk about humanity, we refer to the same human being in each of us. Apart from our differences in our culture and the color of our skin, we are referring to the same human being. Third is that we share the same place that we live in, which is the Mindanao. We share the same natural resources, we share the same sea, although some of it are located in the north or in the south. And lastly, we drink the same water that flows within Mindanao. So if the Bangsamoro and the Lumas and the Christian Filipinos can talk about these commonalities, it becomes an easier matter to talk later about common interests and joint endeavors. Gone are those prejudices that we have with one another, and let's start to view in an entirely different perspective. So tri-people approach in creating a culture of peace in Mindanao. So creating a culture of peace in Mindanao is not a simple case of settling the issue of the right to self-determination of the Bangsamoro people. However, the Bangsamoro people have partially succeeded in getting the implementation of the Tripoli Agreement. Also, it is equally relevant to consider that the Lumads, incidentally all 12 ethno-linguistic groups, are within the area of the SPCPD, or the Southern Philippines Council for Peace and Development. So they have been articulating and asserting their own right to self-determination within the area, which they also consider as their ancestral domain. Also worthwhile to bear in mind that the Christian Filipinos, although they are the vast majority of Mindanao population, not all of them are blessed with prosperity and security in lives. Majority of them are also deprived, marginalized, landless, and powerless. So unifying values, the Bangsamoro, Lumads, and the Christian Filipinos should start a sustained process of talking more positively about each other. So let us offer more kindness and respect to one another. On the other hand, sa mga schools, some of our textbooks carry misconceptions, mislabeling, or omission. Hence, we must be more critical in the use of textbooks. So next is the common activities. So we should encourage each other's joys and pains. Let us be more inviting with one another. So let us start to introduce our differing cultures to one another, and moreover participate in bigger activities or significant activities that would contribute our environment. In this way, we would be a great help to the land that we live in.
Now we're going to go through the quest for survival. This is mainly about the beginning of the MNLF and the MILF. The MNLF was made public back in 1973 and started to claim credit for the series of fighting in Mindanao and Sulu. They organized a central committee with Nur Miswari as chairman and Alonto as vice chairman. Within the MNLF committee, two people who were once allies soon became rivals in these events. Two important people, namely Nur Miswari and Salamat Hashim. In 1973, Nur Miswari moved to Sabah to establish his headquarters. Salamat Hashim, on the other hand, opted for Miswari as he believes that his principles are in deference to what Islam teaches. Soon after, Nur Miswari became chairman in the MNLF and Salamat Hashim became the chairman for foreign affairs. The Bangsamoro Liberation Front was then founded in 1970 by Congressman Rashid Lukman, where it serves as an umbrella organization and under which all liberation forces must radiate. The Supreme Executive Council includes Lukman as the head and Nur Miswari for Sulu Region Affairs and Alonto for Lanao Affairs. But Miswari and Alonto were basically using the BMLO as a cover while strengthening the MNLF. It was like a control mechanism set up by the Lukman group. Only the initial releases were channeled to Lukman and his group for the Libyan aid. The rest went straight to the MNLF. This was the beginning of the BMLO-MNLF fight. Lukman then charged Miswari and Hashim for withholding the letter of Libyan minister bearing an instruction for him to meet Dr. Ali Treki in Sabah to receive the money he requested. Soon, the BMLO was then abolished. Now let's go back to Nur Miswari and Salamat Hashim. The main conflict of their ideologies was that Miswari was nationalistic and Hashim was Islamic-oriented. Hashim then started to point out that the MNLF leadership was being manipulated away from Islamic bases and that the Central Committee is exclusive and secretive. In March 1983, the new MNLF leadership officially declared a separate organization called the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. Islam became the official ideology of the MILF, and when Hashim left from the MNLF, people started to submit a reform proposal to Nur Miswari to strengthen or to reform the organization, that there will be a real functional representative, central committee, and many more. But Miswari rejected the proposal, which led to Dimasangkay Pundato and his associates to form the MNLF reformist faction. The Pundato group tried to seek unity with the new MNLF or the MILF. The meeting succeeded, but it was short-lived. And in 1985, Pundato then surrendered and accepted positions in the government. This was the death of the MNLF reformist as a revolutionary organization. A lot of people may have misconceptualized the difference between MNLF and the MILF, and this report makes things clear. The MNLF ideology is egalitarian, that public law must be founded upon respect to all people regardless of differences in religion, and they are also pro-democracy. They are also loyal to the Republic of the Philippines, and they fight for their belief that Moros are Filipinos and continue to fight for peace in Mindanao. The MILF's ideology, on the other hand, is more on Muslim supremacy. Their political direction is to establish an Islamic region in Mindanao. Clearly, their ideologies may contradict towards the Philippine government. That is why the Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro had a vital role that played in resolving such conflict. The agreement will be discussed later in the report.
So the Moro people Sa September 21, 1972, President Ferdinand Marcos issued Proclamation 1081 putting the whole country under martial law, and he also ordered to surrender all firearms. Hence, to the Moro people, the surrender of their firearms would also mean as being defenseless in a war. Thus, after a few days before the deadline for the mandate to surrender all the firearms, these Moro fighters, calling themselves Iklas, attacked and occupied Marawi City in October 1972. So basically, a few months later, ang fight is spread to parts of Mindanao, specifically Jolo, Zamboanga, Basilan, Cotabato, and Lanao. So the armed forces of the Philippines of the AFP countered this. During the height of the Mindanao conflict from 1972 to 1975, grabe ang losses in both property and human lives. So basically, there is an estimate number of 60,000 civilians that was killed, and the Moro fighters tied up over 50 battalions of the AFP. So basically, ang Organization of Islamic Conference brokered, or OIC, brokered a peace agreement between the Philippine government and the Moro National Liberation Front. So under the support of the powerful OIC, the Tripoli Agreement was signed by the two parties on December 23, 1976.
War by other means. Before I start my report, I would like to point out that this topic mostly blames the government because the author of this topic, who is Salah Jubair, is actually the chairperson of the MILF panel. Events here are one-sided stories and are most likely to be biased. So to start with, the first topic is on negotiation. So negotiation is just war in another form. Usually, we think about war as physical, where force of arms are being used to achieve both military and political objectives. Negotiation pursues the same goal, but through the skillful use of language and diplomacy. So next is war is costly, while negotiation is cheap. A day of war is costlier than a month of talking. What makes it less costly said is that negotiation happens between people in the position lang, dili need ang daghan na manpower. Negotiation is a slow process because it has few or no shortcuts at all. It is a non-ending process as it takes time. Next topic is the foreign connection. International support for the Moros started as early as the late 1960s when a report of massacres of Moros hit the world headlines. The first to react openly was Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. He is the president of Libya who said that his government will come to the rescue of the Moros in Mindanao and Sulu. The first foreign leader to extend concrete help to the Moros was Tun Dato Mustafa Harun, chief of Sabah. However, Kuala Lumpur never admitted aiding the Moros, as a long-standing claim of Sabah being regarded as a territory of the Philippines was a major irritant between two countries. Happenings in 1971. Libyan Foreign Minister Salih Bouyasir came to the Philippines with $1 million to bankroll the ongoing guerrilla training of 300 more recruits in Malaysia. A year later, when martial law was declared, Libyan money, weapons, and other materials started to flow into the front lines in Mindanao and Sulu. The Organization of Islamic Conference, or OIC, was founded on May. Tunku Abdul Rahman became the first Secretary General of this powerful pan-Islamic body. Events in 1972. The Third Islamic Conference of Foreign Ministers took place in Jeddah, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, on February 29 to March 4. Events in 1973. On March 24 to March 26, the Fourth Islamic Conference of Foreign Ministers happened in Benghazi, Libya. The conference also created a voluntary fund for member states to help the Muslims in the southern Philippines. On August of the same year, the four-nation delegation visited Mindanao and Sulu. The members of the delegations were Saudi Arabian Foreign Minister Omar al-Shakaf, Libyan Foreign Minister Abdulati al-Obeidi, Somalian Foreign Minister Arati Galib, and Senegal Ambassador to Egypt Mustafa Sisi. Events in 1974. On March 9 to March 13, Saudi Arabian Prime Minister Omar al-Shakaf visited Philippines again to monitor the state of the Moros. On May 29, President Marcos and President Suharto met at Manado, North Sulawesi, Indonesia, to discuss the Moro Rebellion. The Fifth Islamic Conference of Foreign Ministers was held in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, on June 21 to June 25, 1974. The conference urged the Philippine government to find a political and peaceful solution through negotiation with Muslim leaders, particularly with the representatives of the MNLF. This conference also created a welfare agency known as the Filipino Muslim Welfare and Relief Agency. The initial talks. Events in 1975. On January 18 to January 19, Dr. Muhammad Hassan Al-Tuhame succeeded in bringing the MNLF and the Philippine government to the negotiation table in Jeddah. The MNLF panels were Nur Miswari, Salamat Hashim, who is the MNLF chair, and Abdul Baki Abubakar, who is the MNLF deputy chair. The government's panel were headed by the government panel Alejandro Melchor, and members were Admiral Romulo Espandol, Ambassador Lenin Ding Pangandam, Colonel Jose Almonte, and 4 others. At the conference, the MNLF formally abandoned the pursuit of independence in favor of a strong autonomous region with internal security forces. The talks, however, did not materialize as both sides presented demands that could not meet by either side. The aborted talks after further consultations were scheduled to take place on April 7, but it didn't happen as President Marcos instead called for a meeting in Zamboanga City from April 17 to June 30. Invited in this dialogue were handpicked Muslim leaders, government officials, and the so-called rebels. On July 12 to July 15, the 6th Islamic Conference of Foreign Ministers happened in Jeddah, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Events in 1976. On May 6, Dr. Karim Gaye of Senegal, the new OIC Secretary General, met President Marcos in Nairobi, Kenya. On May 13 to May 16, the 7th Islamic Conference of Foreign Ministers was held in Istanbul, Turkey. On October 1, the Islamic Solidarity Fund donated $1 million to the Agency for Development and Welfare of the Muslims in the Philippines. Moving on to the signing of the covenant. Events in 1976. Mrs. Imelda Marcos, the then First Lady of the Philippines, was designated special envoy of her husband. At the United States, she had an occasion to discuss the Mindanao crisis with Algerian Foreign Minister Abdul Aziz Bouteflika. The second round of the negotiation between the MNLF and the Philippine government took place in Tripoli, Libya on December 15 to December 23. Dr. Ali Treki, the Libyan foreign minister, presided over the series of meetings between the two panels, which culminated in the signing of the covenant known as the Tripoli Agreement of December 23, 1976. The agreement provided for the establishment of autonomy for 13 specific provinces and 9 cities in Mindanao and Sulu. The government panels were Undersecretary Carmelo Barbero, Lenini Bangandaman, Simendato Manu, Karim Sidri, Pacifico Castro, and Colonel Eduardo Ermita. The MNLF panels were Nur Miswari, Salamat Hashim, Abdul Baki Abubakar, and Abdul Rasad Asani. They are with their legal counsels, Attorney Zakaria Candao and Attorney Pangalian Balindong. Events of 1977. On January 20, a formal ceasefire agreement between the two warring parties was signed. The Tripoli agreement was lacking sufficient details, and so the two panels agreed to meet to finalize the agreement, first in Libya on February 9 to March 3, then in Manila on April 21 to April 30. Marcos used his socio-economic and infrastructure agenda as a front with the intent of defeating the MNLF. He built roads, bridges, dikes, and ports. With his land reform program, he further dispossessed the Moros of the remaining land holdings. Rear Admiral Romulo Espandol's appointment as head of the Ministry of Muslim Affairs had led him to renounce Catholicism to qualify for the job, as being a Muslim is the first criterion, and it offended many Muslims in the country. A treaty was signed between Sultan Jamalul Kiram II of Sulu Sultanate and Brigadier General John C. Bates, now known as the Kiram-Bates Treaty. However, until the very last moment of American regime in the Philippines, the treaty was no more than a scrap of paper as it was not recognized. Moving on to waging peace protracts. The last topic of this report. On May 16 to May 22, the 8th Foreign Ministers' Conference convened in Tripoli, Libya. The conference held the government solely responsible for the failure of the negotiation in Tripoli, Libya. The Republic of Senegal hosted the 9th Foreign Ministers' Conference at its capital, Dakar, on April 24 to April 28. The conference called upon both parties to come to a ceasefire and resume negotiation. On May 8 to May 12, the 10th Islamic Conference of Foreign Ministers assembled in Fez, Kingdom of Morocco. The new OIC Secretary General Habib Chati visited Manila to bring up the issue once again on February. Indonesia offered to restart the stalled negotiation, but there was no concrete reply. On March 22 to March 23, Saudi Arabia tried to give the precarious peace another lease on life. Then came the assassination of former Senator Benigno Aquino Jr. on August 21 on the tarmac of the Manila International Airport. And being the bitter political rival, Marcos was a prime suspect as no person or group had a greater motive to execute the assassination. And that is all for my report.
Hello everyone, my name is Cassandra Kisha Lagbas, and the first topic that I'm going to discuss today is the Tripoli Agreement. So, what is the Tripoli Agreement? So, the Tripoli Agreement is an agreement between the Moro National Liberation Front, or MNLF, and the Philippine government. So, the Tripoli Agreement was hailed as a breakthrough in the search for a peaceful negotiation in resolving the Mindanao conflict. So, the Tripoli Agreement refers to an important peace agreement signed between the Philippine government and the Moro National Liberation Front, and it was signed in December 23, 1976 in Tripoli, Libya. So first, itakal nato kung unsa ni ilang gi-refer as Mindanao conflict. So, ang Philippines is composed of 5% of Moro minorities. So in the late 1960s, nagka-conflict ang Moro and Christian communities. Tapos kani nag-escalate and peak during the mid-1970s. So kani nga conflict between the Moro and the Christian communities was so severe and it's very serious. So ang nahitabuan ni, ang MILF is fielded 30,000 of armed fighters, and the Philippine government deployed up to 80% of its combat force against the MILF. So daghan kaayo og nangamatay that time because ani nga conflict between sa MILF and the Philippine government. So pag-abot og mga 1976, nag-start na ang talks between sa Philippine government and the Moros. So diha nila na ano ang agreement which is ang Tripoli Agreement. So muni ang ilang giingon nga ang Tripoli Agreement was hailed as a breakthrough in the search for a peaceful negotiation in resolving the Mindanao conflict. So next is the three salient points in the Tripoli Agreement. So first salient point is the establishment of autonomous region in southern Philippines composed of 13 provinces and all villages and cities therein within the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the Republic of the Philippines. So unsa man ni ang 13 provinces? So kani 13 provinces nandere ang Basilan, Sulu, Tawi-Tawi, Zamboanga del Norte, Zamboanga del Sur, Lanao del Norte, Lanao del Sur, Maguindanao, North Cotabato, Sultan Kudarat, Palawan, Davao del Sur, and South Cotabato. Ang next nga salient points is the agreement in principle of the powers of autonomous region and local and regional affairs, especially on those that touch the religion and culture of Islam as lived by the Moro peoples. So next is the insertion by the Philippine government of the provision that will subject the said agreement to the constitutional processes of the Republic of the Philippines. But however, the euphoria of peace did not last long. So within a few months after signing sa Tripoli Agreement between the Philippine government and the MNLF, so both parties began accusing each other of bad faith and gross violation of the provisions of the said agreement. So this was further exacerbated by the lack of agreement within the Mixed Committee of Interpretation of Paris Agreement in principle reached in Tripoli, Libya. So ang nahitabo ani is this Tripoli Agreement was under kang Marcos. Tapos ang MNLF kay nag-request kang Marcos na i-implement ang Tripoli Agreement by executive order. Pero ang gibuhat ni Marcos, he submitted it as a referendum within the provinces that would be part of the newly proposed autonomous region instead. So, gisubmit ni niya April 17, 1977. So, majority of the voters objected sa agreement. So, meaning ang agreement kay nag-fail siya to create a unified autonomous region led by the MNLF. So, ang nahitabo, ang leaders kay gi-end nila ang talks with the Marcos government and rallied its members to resume guerrilla attacks and demand complete independence. So next is the Proclamation 1628. So the Proclamation 1628 was issued by President Marcos on March 25, 1977, establishing a regional autonomy in the southern Philippines. So unsa man jud ni ang Proclamation 1628? Nganong gi-declare man ni siya? So kani gi-declare ni siya ni President Ferdinand Marcos on March 25, 1977. So ang purpose ani kay ga-declare ka og autonomy in southern Philippines, eventually paving the way of creation of two regional autonomous governments in Western and Central Mindanao. Naman ang two separate autonomous regions nga na-created sa Southern Mindanao. So first was Region 9, composed of Zamboanga del Norte, Zamboanga del Sur, Basilan, Sulu, Tawi-Tawi, and all cities and villages therein in Zamboanga City as the capital. So the second was in Region 12, composed of Lanao del Norte, Lanao del Sur, North Cotabato, Maguindanao, Sultan Kudarat, and all cities and villages therein in Cotabato City as the capital. So next is the Code of Filipino Muslim Personal Laws. So it was promulgated by President Marcos under the Presidential Decree 1083 and created more than 56 Sharia districts and circuit courts for the areas of autonomy. So this act was gleaned by Philippine government as a full compliance of the Tripoli Agreement, which stated that the areas of autonomy, the Muslims shall have the right to set up their own courts which implement the Islamic Sharia laws. So kaning CMPL refers to the law that governs the family and personal relations of Muslim Filipinos. So it was initiated to assure Muslims that the government protects their religion and their rights, that they are treated equally with the rest of the population, and that they are an integral part of Filipino nation. Next is the Aquino government. So the ouster of President Marcos from power of the accession of Mrs. Corazon Aquino after the EDSA uprising gave new impetus to the Moro people's struggles for self-determination. So next is the new constitution. So the new Philippine Constitution, ratified in February 1987, provides for the creation of the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. So kaning new constitution kay na-approve ni siya adtong October 12, 1986. Thus, it was presented to President Corazon C. Aquino on October 15, 1986. Tapos, ayha ra siya na official or na-ratified pag-abot sa February 2, 1987 by a plebiscite. Sa maning plebiscite nga gibuhat nila. So, ang meaning sa plebiscite is kanang direct vote of all the members of an electorate on an important public question such as change in the Constitution. So, sa may result ani. So, number 1, the MNLF rejected the constitutional provisions governing the creation of autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. So, number 2, the MNLF proposes that President Aquino use the transitory provision of the said constitution to issue the executive order granting full autonomy to Mindanao, Basilan, Sulu, Palawan, and Tawi-Tawi. So next is the Organic Act of Republic Act 6734. On August 1, 1989, President Aquino signed into the law of Republic Act 6734, the Organic Act. So kani nag-create siya og autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao as mandated in Article 10, Sections 15 to 21 on the Philippine Constitution. So the same law provides the plebiscite shall be conducted in the provinces of Basilan, katong 13 provinces nga mention kaganiha. So the plebiscite was set for November 19, 1989. The official tabulation of the results of November 19, 1989 confirmed the prediction that the provinces and city with Christian majority population shall opt out to Autonomous Region for Muslim Mindanao, or ARMM. The only exception was the Islamic city of Marawi that rejected the Organic Act for a different reason. So that is, it is not Islamic enough, particularly on the issue of Sharia. So with that, the result of the plebiscite, only 4 provinces shall constitute to ARMM. So kaning provinces is Lanao del Sur, Maguindanao, Sulu, and Tawi-Tawi. So after February 1990 ARMM elections, President Aquino with a coterie of government officials and diplomatic representatives inaugurated the creation of ARMM and sworn into the office its first set of officials in Cotabato City in April 1990. After the February 1990 ARMM elections, President Aquino with a coterie of government officials and diplomatic representatives inaugurated the creation of ARMM and sworn into the office its first set of officials in Cotabato City in April 1990.
So let's proceed to the Mindanao peace process. The Mindanao peace process is not a new invention of our era. In fact, the present realities in Mindanao are fruits of various peace processes with differing emphasis depending on the mood and temper of the Manila-based central government. Historically, establishment of Fort del Pilar and Zamboanga City, the naval station at Pulok in the present province of Maguindanao, the intramuros in the town of Hulu and the military stations along the Rio Grande de Mindanao from Taviran to Reina Regente were examples of containment programs to build peace in the southern Philippines. So the so-called Moro problem haunted the Spanish government in Manila for more than 3 centuries and a half. The northern Mindanao area and some parts of western Mindanao were successfully brought to the mainstream politics by way of settlements beginning the second half of the 19th century. The Moro populace was left on their own and lived under their sultans and datus and were governed according to their laws and traditions. Spanish anointment and recognition was always rejected by the Moro people. So Bates Treaty 1899 recognizes the sovereignty of USA. It is the real beginning of the campaign to integrate or assimilate the Moro people into the mainstream body politic in the whole archipelago. And after the unilateral abrogation of the Bates Treaty, the American U.S. colonial government with its far superior army brought the surrender of practically all Moro resistance to the American rule. To put peace in southern Mindanao on a more solid footing, several programs were unfolded. Number 1, the economic development of Mindanao's fertile land. Plantations were opened and business was established in major trading posts such as Zamboanga, Cotabato, Jolo, and Vigan. Mindanao was open to settlement from Luzon and the Visayas. It began with the establishment of the agricultural colonies in the fertile plains of then the entire province of Cotabato. It followed by a massive and well-planned settlement programs during Commonwealth period. One of the pillars of the integration program was the educational system established in the whole southern Philippines. So there are two salient features of the peace programs: universal public school system and the pensionado program for the scion of Moro ruling families, and from the latter would emerge the new Moro leaders, the Biam brothers, Pandatun, Sinswats, Alonto, Lukman, Kiramsan, etc., who advocated the full integration of the Moro people into Philippine body politic. The Philippine government under President Marcos came up with different political setups to address the autonomy issue in southern Philippines. It's a great help for us to review these setups in order to contextualize present debates or impasses between the government of the Republic of the Philippines and the MNLF panels. So the political structures adopted were the following. In Presidential Decree 742 and LOI 290, the government believed that by creating special regional commissions in the areas involved in the conflict, the social as well as economic causes of conflict could be better addressed through the government's coordinated and fast responses by removing piecemeal measure and red tape. Everybody then welcomed the Tripoli Agreement with much fanfare and celebrations. For one, it was the first peaceful Christmas since 1972. It worked for all, putting an immediate stop to shooting ambuscades, killings, and war. The environment of war loss transformed into a hope-filled expectation for an enduring peace settlement in the southern Philippines. Now let's move on to the peace process under the Ramos government. The Sapanas West Java Indonesia Agreement of April 14 to 19, 1993 and the Jakarta Memorandum of Agreement of October 25 to November 7, 1993 are the following. Full implementation of the 1976 Tripoli Agreement both in letter and spirit within the realm of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Republic of the Philippines. Interim ceasefire agreement stipulating a cessation of provocative acts and armed hostilities for the duration of the formal talks and the organization of a joint ceasefire committee. The mixed committee to work on the details left out for further discussion as provided by the Tripoli Agreement, and the creation of support committees to come out with detailed studies on the various positions of the Tripoli Agreement. Lastly, the creation of the working group directly under the GRP and the MNLF panels. This group is tasked to come with the transitional implementing structure and mechanism for the implementation of the agreements forged between the GRP and the MNLF. The OIC recognized the constitutional processes that include a plebiscite. MNLF Chairman Nur Miswari also recognized the need to ask the government on the political arrangement of autonomy in the southern Philippines. However, he insisted that any consultation with our people in the area of autonomy shall be the sole responsibility of the autonomous Muslim regional government. This was the letter of Nur Miswari to President Marcos on April 15, 1977. The 1987 Constitution provides for concrete steps on the creation of the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. These steps were completed and gave birth to the existing arm. The Organic Act of RA 6734 provides steps to be followed for the amendment of the same. There are two basic issues in the southern Philippines. Number one is the question of autonomy and self-governance in local and regional affairs as demanded by the MNLF and all local government units, particularly Mindanao for this matter. Number two is the question of peace and development. The two are linked and intertwined because they propose an approach that involved two parallel tracks to the southern Philippines problem. The first addresses the governance and autonomy concerns, while the second addresses the economic development concerns. These are the powers and functions of the Southern Philippine Council for Peace and Development, or SPCPD. On September 2, 1996, the Philippine government and the Moro National Liberation Front, or MNLF, signed the historic peace agreement after decades of wars that exacted tens of thousands death casualties and resulted in hundreds of thousands of refugees both here and the nearby Malaysia. The arena of peace and development have risen for the MNLF, the Philippine government, and the people of Southern Philippines, Muslims and Christians alike. The marginalized experienced by the Lumad and the Moros in the last 100 years are not perceived as acts of fraternal love from either government or Christian settlers. The MNLF led the Bangsamoro in an armed struggle for national liberation. The Lumad founded Lumad Mindanao and articulated their own desire for self-determination in their own ancestral lands. In creating a culture of peace in Mindanao, we need to acknowledge some very realities or make some fundamental assumptions. Number one is that Mindanao is inhabited by population that may be classified broadly into three distinct segments: the Lumad, the Muslims, and the Christian settlers. Number two is that Mindanao is already a shared territory. Not a single segment of population can claim Mindanao as theirs. Finally, three segments of population are capable of working out a modus vivendi which makes Mindanao peaceful and harmonious.
Okay, let's now dive deep to understanding the Mindanao conflict, Mindanao at the crossroad. First, let's begin with the issue on Mindanao independence. In 1910, Zamboanga business sector presented a written petition to isolate the island for the development of plantation interests. In 1930, the question of Philippine independence from the United States elicited Muslim preference for exclusion from the projected free Philippines under Filipino rule. In 1970, the independence aspiration of Mindanao was again revived by the Mindanao independence movement of Datu Udtog Matalam of Pagalungan, Cotabato, Ruben Canoy of Cagayan de Oro, and Nur Miswari of the MNLF. In 1976, a compromise agreement known as the Tripoli Agreement, through the mediation of the Organization of Islamic Conference, was achieved. The government from Marcos to Estrada operated on the clear promises of the Tripoli Agreement that autonomy, not independence, was to be the framework of any resolution of issues and conflict, and that the Philippine Constitution would be the point of reference for the definition of the meaningful extent of autonomy. But what the government has ignored and belittled were certain fundamental realities and facts that have remained active in Muslim consciousness. That the MNLF, MILF, and other Muslim social movements in the Philippines are united in their belief that independence is the underlying essence of autonomy. Second, any modus vivendi or compromise agreement related to the implementation of the Tripoli Accord will be temporary and tactical in nature. Third, the ultimate hope of the Muslim community in the Philippines for progress and prosperity lies in the dynamic relation and linkage to the Islamic world. Several corroborative factors that have contributed to the hardening of the independence imperative of the Muslim struggle. First, the inability of the state through the government and its agencies to adequately or substantially meet the basic and ideal needs of the Muslim community. Second, the obvious trend on the part of the Muslim community to seek ultimate satisfaction of their aspirations from within their own societies and the Muslim world. Third, external vested interests have exploited the Mindanao conflict for their own benefit. And lastly, civil society's failure to remove anti-Muslim bias in historical consciousness. So what's the status of Mindanao today? Mindanao conflict has greatly changed in strategies. The battles in Lanao del Sur, Lanao del Norte, Maguindanao, and Basilan involved men on both sides equipped with modern and highly destructive weapons of war. However, the rebels' defeat in battles will not ensure permanent victory, as it only changes their strategy of armed struggle to guerrilla attacks or the Islamic concept of Fil-Sabilillah. Juramentados are individuals who took the vows of killing as many of the enemies as their lives would allow. The Spanish introduction of the steamboat led to the destruction of Jolo and other island communities, leading to the state of jihad as the weapon of the Bangsamoro struggle. Socio-economic conditions. Muslim and Lumad Mindanao have lost their traditional means of survival and have been drawn to the undergrowth of the economic system, which offers lucrative but dangerous sources of revenue such as smuggling of guns, drug trafficking, piracies, and kidnapping for ransom. The MILF, MNLF, and Abu Sayyaf have gained support from idealist youths and displaced elements of Muslim society who lack credentials or opportunities to be absorbed into Christian or non-Muslim dominated employment fields. Deteriorating socio-economic conditions would seriously affect all aspects of life and society. Philippine democracy, unless radically reformed in essence and form, perpetuates the injustice against the national minorities. Things to be accepted and done for real autonomy to be realized. First, the present democratic system is not sufficient for the real autonomy the Muslims may accept short of total independence. Second, political representation includes at least 2 senators in the Senate to be elected by all registered Muslim voters throughout the country. Third, the federated state gradually reduced its national subsidy system to allow for internal resources and support, including from the Islamic world. And lastly, the federated Muslim state should devise a plan of action for Muslim communities outside of Muslim Mindanao.
Hello everyone, I'm Adrian B. Restingol. So, in this part of our report, I'm going to talk about the topic towards a peaceful political settlement or the Bangsamoro struggle for nationhood. First, let's take a look at the brief history of the present Bangsamoro struggle. In the 1970s, the Moro National Liberation Front, or MNLF, waged an armed struggle to gain independence for Bangsamoro, while the war in Mindanao raged on. The New People's Army, or NPA, of the Communist Party of the Philippines, or CPP, rebelled in Luzon and the Visayas. Faced with the prospect of fighting in 2 fronts, the government sued for peace with the MNLF. In 1976, the government created a negotiating panel headed by Canelo Z. Barbero to talk peace with the MNLF. That resulted in the forging of the now historic Tripoli Agreement. The areas of autonomy consisting of 13 provinces and cities therein were recognized by the GRP as the Bangsamoro homeland. Then, the late President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. referendum on the areas of autonomy and established the regional commissions for regions 9 and 12 with no rebellion from the Christian or Lumad communities until 1989. So, in the next following slides, we will be talking about the historical events and agreements that happened on the Bangsamoro struggle for nationhood. The Tripoli Agreement. The 1976 Tripoli Agreement was signed on December 23, 1976 in Tripoli, Libya by Carmelo Z. Barbero, representing the government of the Philippines and Missouri of the Moro National Liberation Front. The agreement defined autonomous administrative divisions for Muslims in the southern Philippines, the establishment of an autonomous government, judicial system for Sharia law, and special security forces, and the observance of a ceasefire. Next, Final Peace Agreement or FPA. The 1996 final peace agreement divided the mechanism for implementation of the 1976 Tripoli Agreement into two phases. The implementation of Final Peace Agreement or FPA. The government failed to fully implement the FPA and its substantive provisions as far as MNLFC or OIC are concerned. At the same time, the negotiations with MILF broke down and led to renewed fighting between government troops, and this June the MILF carried on the more armed struggle with the when the MNLF decided to stop the fighting after they signed the FPA and its chairman became then ARMM regional governor and concurrent SPCD chairman. Ed Memo. The government continued the negotiations for peace and they were already set to negotiate on the substantive with the MILF on April 27, 2000. The GRP, chaired by Lieutenant General Edgardo E. Batenga, AFP, and the MILF Peace Panel with Ghazali Jafar as acting chairman, signed an Ed Memoir in Cotabato City. The two sides agreed, among others, on the following: all-out war. The administration of the Philippine President Joseph Estrada advocated a hardline stance against the MILF, directing the armed forces of the Philippines to go all out against the MILF on March 21, 2000. After the secessionist group invaded the town of Coswagan, Lanao del Norte, and took hundreds of residents hostage. Calls for peace. After the all-out war, former President Aquino and Ramos and the Catholic Bishop Conference or CBCP called for an immediate ceasefire and a resumption of peace negotiations. This was endorsed by Muslim congressmen and local government officials and by an overwhelming number of Muslim and Christian professional, religious, youth, women's, civic, and non-government organizations. Federal State. On May 22, 2000, Senator Pimentel, together with Senators John H. Osmeña and Francisco Estatad, filed a concurrent resolution in the Senate calling for a constitutional convention to revise the Constitution by adopting a federal system of government and for the other purposes. Bangsamoro State or Commonwealth. The Bangsamoro fully supports federalism, but only if a truly autonomous Bangsamoro state or region is established first as envisioned in the FPA, as the MILF also demands. In a genuine federal government, each state or region enjoys certain basic powers and rights, such as the following powers and rights in the next slides. And it is also imperative that, considering the urgency of reaching a peaceful political solution to a problem that has troubled the country for decades, Congress must enact a law establishing a truly autonomous Bangsamoro state or commonwealth or regional government as much as possible, and thought that this solution can be the comprehensive, lasting, and just solution to the Bangsamoro struggle. So, referendum. A referendum is a direct vote by the electorate on a proposal, law, or political issue. This is in contrast to an issue being voted on by a representative. So, in connection, many people, both Muslims and Christians, have already died in the all-out war in Mindanao. And it is important to bear in mind that the solution will only be effective so long as the parties involved accept said solutions. Therefore, the Bangsamoro must be consulted first before the government undertakes any action, and literally. So, a referendum with UN and OIC participation have been called, wherein the Bangsamoro would be asked to choose one among three possible alternatives, and these are as follows. Bangsamoro illegally annexed, so the matter of dismemberment of the country is questionable since the Bangsamoro homeland was never legally part of the Philippines. The U.S. occupied the Bangsamoro state by force and created colonies by resettling Filipinos in Mindanao inlands owned by the Moros, so which was an illegal annexation. Bangsamoro Historic Declarations. When the Americans contemplated granting independence to the Philippines, more than a million Moros of Mindanao and Sulu, led by Sultan Mangigin, Haji Panglima Nuno, Datu Sukahan, Maharaja Habing, Abdullah Piang, and Datu Benito, sent a petition to the U.S. Congress on February 1, 1924. The petition read in part thus: in the event that the United States grants independence to the Philippine Islands, it is our firm intention and resolve to declare ourselves an independent constitutional sultanate to be known to the world as Moro Nation. MNLF and MILF positions. So, on the second point of the referendum, there is a clear recognition of the Tripoli Agreement, which recognized GRP national sovereignty and territorial integrity as a basis for the referendum, even by the UN. It is assumed that the MNLF would prefer the Bangsamoro state to remain within the Philippines as one country, two systems. The crux of the conflict with MNLF version of full implementation of the FPA, because the failure of the Congress, which is not the fault of the executive or secretary, agreed to enact a new organic law that will embody the amendments as provided in the FPA in 1998 and have 2 years for socio-economic projects in SZOPAD and plebiscite on year 2000. After the ARMM has been expanded, then elections will be held in 2003 for the new regional government. So, in this reason, the 27th ICFM in Kuala Lumpur happened. So, the ICFM referred the matter to the Ministerial Committee of the Six, chaired by Dr. Alawi Shibab, the Foreign Minister of Indonesia. After hearing the arguments presented by the two sides, the MC6 recommended the following.
So good morning everyone. I will be talking about, at first I am Adrian Lacuna and I will be talking about Sabah and the Tripoli Agreement. So first we'll be discussing about Sabah. So what's in Sabah? So the Sabah dispute refers to the disagreement over the ownership of the eastern part of Sabah, a Malaysian state on the island of Borneo between Malaysia and the Philippines. So the Philippines bases its claim according to the historical and legal grounds dating back to the Sultanate of Sulu, while Malaysia, on the other hand, claims that Sabah was obtained legally and peacefully from the Sultanate of Sulu in 1878. So these are the author's comments about this issue. So the author criticizes the Philippines' claim to Sabah and emphasizes the attitudes and perspectives of Sabah residents as a major impediment to the claim's success. So the people of Sabah have expressed a desire to remain under Malaysian rule rather than being integrated into the Philippines. The Philippines should also focus on resolving internal issues rather than pursuing Sabah's land. The author also added that to gain power and development, the government must instead focus on the intellectual infrastructure of leadership education, social discipline, organization, and technological scientific foundation. Then lastly, the author also uses Singapore as an example of how a small country with little natural resources may achieve enormous prosperity through strong and focused leadership, as well as a large intellectual, socio-economic, and institutional foundation. Lastly, the author criticizes the Philippine senior government leaders for failing to act with honor and dignity throughout the Sabah dispute. So now we will be talking about the Tripoli Agreement. So this is the agreement between the government of the Republic of the Philippines and the Moro Liberation Front with the participation of the quadripartite ministerial commission members of the Islamic Conference and the Secretary General of the Organization of Islamic Conference. So these negotiations between the Philippines and the Moro Liberation Front in Tripoli happened on December 15, 1976. The negotiations were a result of discussions held with President Marcos of the Philippines and were in response to a joint communique issued in Tripoli in November 1976. The quadripartite ministerial commission of the Secretary General of the Islamic Conference were involved in the negotiations. The meetings were headed by Dr. Ali Abdul Salam Turki, Minister of State for Foreign Relations of the Libyan Arab Republic. So these are the comprising delegations during the said event. So, during these negotiations, which were marked by a spirit of conciliation and understanding, it has been agreed upon the following: that first, the establishment of the autonomy in the southern Philippines within the realm of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Republic of the Philippines. Second, the areas of autonomy for the Muslims in the southern Philippines shall comprise the following: first, Basilan, Sulu, Tawi-Tawi, Zamboanga del Sur, Zamboanga del Norte, North Cotabato, Maguindanao, Sultan Kudarat, Lanao del Norte, Lanao del Sur, Davao del Sur, South Cotabato, Palawan, and all the cities and villages situated in the above-mentioned areas. Then third, the foreign policy is the responsibility of the central government in the Philippines. National defense affairs are the responsibility of the central authority, and discussions will be held later regarding the integration of the Moro National Liberation Front with the Philippine Armed Forces. Then, Muslims in autonomous areas have the right to establish their own Sharia courts and be presented in all courts including the Supreme Court and have their, their representatives appointed based on the necessary qualifications. Then the autonomous authorities have the right to establish schools, colleges, and universities. The Muslims will have their own administrative system in compliance with autonomy objectives. Then the autonomous authorities will have their own economic and financial system. Then seventh, autonomous authorities will have the right to representation and participation in the central government and other organizations. Then special regional security forces will be set up for Muslims in the south of the Philippines. Then a legislative assembly and executive council will be formed in the autonomous areas for Muslims through direct election and appointment by the legislative assembly respectively. Then, mines and mineral resources fall within the competence of the central government, and an unreasonable percentage of revenues will be fixed for the benefit of autonomous areas. 11. A mixed committee will address remaining issues and find solutions. Then 12. A ceasefire will be declared after the agreement's signing, supervised by a joint committee. and the organization of the Islamic Conference. Then, the said Joint Committee shall also be charged with the supervising of the following: A. A complete amnesty in the area of the autonomy of the renunciation of all legal claims and codes resulting from the events which took place in the south of the Philippines. Then B. The release of all the political prisoners who had relations with events in the south of the Philippines. C. The return of all refugees who have abandoned their areas in the south of the Philippines. Then D. To guarantee the freedom of movements and meetings. And 13th, a joint meeting will be held in Jeddah during the first week of the month of March 1977 to initial what has been concluded by the committee referred to in Para 11. Then 14th, the final autonomy agreement will be signed in Manila, Philippines between the government of the Philippines, the Moro National Liberation Front, and the Islamic Conference represented by the quadripartite Ministerial Commission and the Secretary General of the Organization of the Islamic Conference. Then, after signing the agreement in Manila, a provisional government will be established in the autonomous areas and it will prepare for the elections of the Legislative Assembly and administer the territories until the government is formed by the elected assembly. Then 16th, the government of the Philippines shall take all the necessary constitutional sources for the implementation of the entire agreement. And fourth, and this is the last one, so this agreement shall come into force with effect from the date of the signature done in the city of Tripoli on the 2nd Muharram 1397 H, corresponding to 23rd December 1976 AD, in 3 original copies in Arabic, English, French language, and all equal in legal power.
The Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro. The Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro is a final peace agreement signed between the Government of the Philippines and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front on March 27, 2014 at the Malacañang Palace in Manila. It aims to establish an autonomous Bangsamoro. The MILF agreed to decommission its armed wing and turn over their firearms to a third party selected by the rebels and the Philippine government. The CAB consolidates and affirms the understanding between the government of the Philippines and the MILF. And that concludes our report. Thank you very much for listening, everyone.